and go the webinar.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Phoebe Koundouri. I am one of the co-chairs of SDSN Europe, and very happy to be here today to discuss SDGs in times of crisis. After 2 full years of the pandemic and facing additional problems, the huge economic crisis and inflation, the climate change crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and of course, geopolitical tensions, we really need to see how Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals can be put again into the center of policy making. And why is that pressing? It is pressing because it's our only blueprint for the future. The only science-driven, holistic, integrated blueprint that allows us to hope for a transition to a sustainable future. I am excited to give the floor to Angelo Riccaboni, Professor Angelo Riccaboni at the Siena University, and of course, the person who inspired us all to support the Siena International School on Sustainable Development. Angelo is also a co-chair of SDSN Europe, and I better leave the floor to him. Angelo?
Thank you, Phoebe. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to introduce this very impressive panel. We are within the Siena International School on Sustainable Development, an initiative which sees as partners the Santa Chiara Lab of the University of Siena, ASVIS, the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development, Enel Foundation, SDSN, SDSN Europe, and the Italian University Network for Sustainable Development. This school was created together with Enrico Giovannini when he was chair of ASVIS, and we are very pleased that this year the international edition had a very large success. We had a first online phase with 375 participants from 60 countries. The topics we deal with are those related to decarbonization, having regard to the food, energy, and industry sectors. We offered 11 webinars, and in June, there will be a in-person session, in-person phase, where 30 selected participants from 18 countries will share the same week in order to discuss issues of sustainable development with a very international faculty. So within our webinars of the school, we decided to make a discussion, a conversation on, as Phoebe said, SDGs in times of crisis, which is a very important topic. I would like just to anticipate that the SDSN Sustainable Development Report for 2022, which will be launched on June the 2nd, this report shows a stagnation of the trend toward SDGs for the last 2 years, after a growth that we saw, slow growth we saw between 2015 and 2019. So this is a clear signal of what is happening. We know that there should not be a trade-off between dealing with the crisis and achieving SDGs. But we also know that fears of economic recession and fear of losing political consensus make it difficult to avoid such trade-off. So the key question today is how to maintain high attention on achieving SDGs, which is the track to be followed in order to not to lose the right path. And on behalf of the school, I do thank our panelists and Enrico Giovannini and Jeffrey Sachs for their valuable contribution. So thanks a lot to everybody, and back to you, Phoebe.
Thank you very much, Angelo. Indeed, we have an impressive line of speakers, an impressive panel, and of course, the participation of Minister Enrico Giovannini, who is indeed an inspiring leader in this field. I was so impressed when I was in Italy discussing different RFFs across Europe. I was so impressed by his speech because he really put SDGs as the priority assessment for each and every investment in his ministry. And this shows how important it is to have deep understanding on the part of the governments and policymakers on the need to focus on the SDGs in order to achieve the transformation that is needed for the transition to sustainability. So today, as Angelo said, we will be trying to understand how to assure that the efforts that we are investing in dealing with the current multiple crises can lead to a positive transformation on key sustainable development challenges. And we also want to know how collective transnational effort, cooperation, and coordination can accelerate the transformations that are needed for the implementation of the SDGs. We are going to moderate this discussion with our other co-chair at SDSN Europe, Adolf Kloke, who is with us today, and he will be discussing all the issues with us. And I will now turn to our panel and ask the president of the German Environment Agency, Dirk Messner, to give us his first reaction to these present questions. Dirk?
Yeah, thank you very much, Phoebe. Thank you very much, Angelo. And thank you very much for the invitation. So first of all, I would like to focus on the war issue, the war of Russia against Ukraine and the impacts on climate issues and sustainability development issues. I will not focus on the immediate impacts, so energy prices or food crisis, because we have debates on that in the public already. My main point, which I would like to make is, and Angelo, this links to your perception that without global, and Phoebe, you also said this, without global cooperation, there will not be success when it comes to climate issues and sustainable development goals. And I'm really concerned about the quality and the stability of the global cooperation system. And this becomes even clearer in the situation of the war against Ukraine. And I have three perspectives on that very briefly. And Massamba, I'm very much keen to listen from you how you are looking at the kind of issues which I'm going to talk about. So the first perspective regarding the pressure and the threat to the international system is the following. If we look at the period between 2000 and 2020, what we can observe is that we are jumping from one global interdependency crisis into the next global interdependency crisis. We had 9/11, we had the war against terror afterwards, Afghanistan and Iraq. We had the financial crisis. Then we moved into the refugee crisis. Afterwards came the pandemic. And now we are even in a war with nuclear threats. I mean, imagine in 20 years, 7, 8 of these big global interdependency crises. And all of those imply backlashes for sustainable development and backlashes for climate. So if we move forward like this, we will not achieve none of our goals. No? And what this demonstrates is that we have still fundamental problems. These globalization dynamics, these global interdependency structures and constellations are not under control. And we need to think hard about how to improve this rapidly, because if we move forward in this rhythm of global interdependency crisis every 3-4 years during the next 10 to 20 years, we will move into very difficult territory. So the second perspective is then on Russia, right? I mean, our narrative is that Russia is implying currently a global threat to the international order, the global order, international security. And I agree on that, including talking about nuclear escalations. I mean, this is a situation which is terrible. And we would expect that in such a situation, the whole world would be united with a common discourse towards the aggressor. No? But I would like to emphasize that this is not the case, and that we need to talk about that. Because if you look at the United Nations General Assembly, 41 countries voted neutral. No? 12 countries did not attend the voting itself. So more than 50 countries can be described as neutral actors in this conflict, which we perceive in the Western countries as a threat against the global community. No? And we need all of these 41 countries for most of the challenges we are talking about. So if we would like to stabilize the climate system without China and India, neutral countries in this context, we will not go nowhere. No? And it's also not only a distinction between democratic countries and non-democratic countries, because India and Senegal and South Africa are democratic countries, no? But they are neutral in this context. What are the implications for climate negotiations? What are the implications for alliances for sustainable development? We need a strategy for that. We need to talk about this. No? So suggesting to the global public that the whole world is united is misguiding. No? My third perspective is then, Massamba, here I'm counting on your arguments, no? Because I've been reading a lot global media during the last weeks, you know, talking to people from what we call the global South. And I mean, the narrative there is in many corners that this is a war of Russia against the West. So this is not a war of Russia against the global community, it's a war of Russia against the West. And what I'm also listening to and reading in newspapers and analysis is that there is mistrust against the West. And we should not ignore that. No? And when I'm digging deeper into these arguments, it's not necessary to share those, no? But they are existing. And this is important to recognize. I'm seeing three arguments which are being repeated and being repeated. No? And I will mention the three arguments which are the basic for this mistrust against the West. And then I'm already finishing, Phoebe. So the first argument which I'm reading again and again is about double standards and hypocrisy. No? So Russia, this is a global threat. This is our argument in the West. Please, solidarity. No? And the answer very often is, did you look at Yemen during the last years? 250,000 dead people. This is our war. And Russia is your war. Double standards, hypocrisy. No? Very similar so when it comes to the refugee issue. No? The Western countries did not recognize really the refugee crisis until the refugees stand literally in our cities. No? Double standards, hypocrisy. Putin to international courts, great. No? Who in the West did ask for sending Mr. Bush, President Bush, to an international court? Iraq, hypocrisy, double standards. No? So this is one argument which I'm reading. The second argument which I'm finding is that the Western countries are talking about global fairness on the one hand side, but very often they do not deliver. No? So, and examples for that, the pandemic, vaccines, first, rich countries first, afterwards, poor people. No? And then climate protection, we are not delivering as Western countries, but the 1 billion euros for adaptation, for the adaptation fund, where is the money? Also not delivering. This is the second argument which I'm reading again. And the third argument which I'm reading again is that looking at Europe talks as if we were the most important and most brilliant universalists on Earth and the planet, but we have a very Eurocentric perspective. No? And an example which I have been finding again and again in this kind of argumentations is that look at the European Green Deal. It has been formulated and then presented to the public without any kind of consultation with our neighbor, Africa. No? And in the European Green Deal, we are asking for climate neutrality, so less imports of fossil fuels, also from Africa. No? We are talking about circular economy, so less imports of resources from African countries. This in the long term is very good because ecosystems need to be stabilized, but we should have discussed this beforehand with our African neighbors. No? Why haven't we prepared from the beginning a European-African Green Deal? No? So Eurocentric perspectives. And I think that we need to reflect about these kind of criticisms and voices from many parts of the world to get the global cooperation system really work. Thank you very much for your listening.
Very impressive identification of criticism on us European, and it takes courage and it takes a real effort to figure out how this criticism can be handled, can be overcome, and can be dealt with in a framework which is very collaborative and international. It seems like we lack the political leadership that can gather a significant number of countries under a collaboration scheme that could really mobilize the implementation of the SDGs in their true sense, in the sense of being a truly international agenda to be implemented holistically and in a very synergistic way. Thank you very much, Dirk. We are coming back to you with more questions. I will now continue to Markus Müller, Managing Director and Global Head of Chief Investment Office at Deutsche Bank. Markus, what do you think is the situation and how can investment and the financing, the finance sector, the financial institutions can help to mobilize SDG implementation? I also want you to talk to us about your amazing work on biodiversity and integrating the value of biodiversity in financial decisions. Markus?
Thank you, Phoebe. And thank you very much for having me here, and I hope you can hear me well. So it's indeed a complex situation where we are in, but let me quote Mencken, one American author with German roots, who said once, "To each complex problem, there's an answer which is clear, simple, and wrong." So we need also in the context of the SDGs to embrace complexity and exact complexity of transformation to manage transformation successfully. If we simplify such a complex situation, we will lead, or we have then a tendency to fail. So this is point number one. We have to accept this complexity and need to find for every point within this complexity a tool to measure them towards a dedicated goal. So this as a kind of tiny preface. Secondly, let us delve into the understanding of socioeconomic change. An economy and a society in general follows a path dependency. So this dependency is governed, I call it always with Braude, Ferdinand Braude's words, with a long durée and then a court durée. So very long passage of time versus very short passage of time. And the socio-economic development therefore follows a kind of chaos. So krei, it's necessary, and hodos, it's path. So a target path. And the current crisis shows us that we more or less have not left traditional path we have been on. We have no alternative developed, which is a real alternative to what we know from the past. Just if we have something which delivers a real alternative to the current or to previous stages, society will change to this alternative. And one reason of this is, of course, the complexity of transformation and the clear fact that the majority of the world still need to reach a point of affordability of change. So especially when I think about Africa, people there need to afford to focus on transformation, need to afford to focus on mid to long-term goals. But many people rather have the worry how to feed the family tomorrow. And these problems are not getting better. These problems are getting severe. Then on top, we have the discussion also in the Western world, oh, what can we do with it? Do we want to give up wealth? Don't we give up wealth? So short-termism versus long-termism, all these difficult discussions. At the end of the day, if we look at planetary boundaries, maybe we have to accept the fact that it might get worse before it's getting better. So we might, as a society, need to understand what is at risk before we know what is at risk. So this is a word from Hans Jonas, a German philosopher, because if we do not understand what is at risk, we don't react to this. So this is maybe something which we maybe have to face now. But let me turn a little bit into a positive. So what we can do is the following. The planetary boundaries and also hitting planetary boundaries and hitting social dimensions in a negative sense is, from my understanding, rather a result of something which has been managed wrong or which went in the wrong direction. We should address this, but the underlying problem is rather that we do not see nature and the world we are living in as capital. As capital in the sense of that it's delivering to us services, ecosystem services, social services we all depend on. We can also translate this allegory also in the social sphere. So society is capital we all need to survive, because society is delivering for every individual a societal service. And the same counts for nature. And we are all, also societies, are embedded in nature, and then within societies, the economy is embedded. And if we do not understand nature as capital, nature as asset classes, we won't be able to see when we have destroyed the stock, and then we won't be able to understand that the ecosystem services will fail in quality and in quantity. And this will lead exactly to the problem of hitting planetary boundaries and making the complex transformation a society either way faces even more difficult, because complexity can also be a hindrance for change. Individuals fear complexity. So now we need to find a way to make this evolution smooth. And one thing I think is changing the economic model we are living in, putting nature at the heart of our activity, nature as capital, and protecting with this biodiversity, because biodiversity is more or less the trillions of creatures we are having on this planet. We can't measure, we can't weigh, we just know that they are there or even not there, but they live in habitats. We need to find to value these habitats. Maybe the system for environmental economic accounting is one potential approach for this. But based on this nature accounting, we need then to define the value of ecosystem services and have to understand what kind of negative impact our economic activity has towards then the natural capital. This will help countries, continents like Africa. This will help to understand that GDP is just a flow and not a stock measure. And this goes then hand in hand with environmental and financial literacy, which we need because we have forgotten in the developed world what is the difference between price and value. And I think the current crisis, be it the crisis in Europe, be it the crisis we faced during the last years all over the world, just have been symptoms of the underlying problem that we have not really changed completely. And now what we can do is also as banks, we can act as an agent of positive change to reveal the positive aspects and the opportunities which are baked in the fact that nature has to be seen as capital. And if this is becoming a part of policy decision on the business side and governmental side, we will see a change happening. And all this together makes me then at the end very positive. Although I think for the time being, we will maybe see some negative developments, as I said at the beginning, before it's getting better. But don't forget, maybe we also are talking in a bubble. The majority of the world need to get a solid alternative to their current daily life problems. And if we just think about nature-based solutions, which are part of the nature as capital discussion, we really can show that there is more in for society and for states around the world. Jobs, food security, clean air, and so on, because nature is so smart that nature can adapt itself to it. But we have to use a paradox. We humans now need nature's support to fix what the humans have more or less destroyed. And this is something I think which also will give stability to societies, especially in the global south. And this is one of the biggest inclusion programs I can think about, thinking about nature as capital. And the current energy discussion is just, again, for me, an example of what the underlying problem is. I'm positive that we can do it. So I've never talked so much about nature as capital as in the last days. And I will later on have a panel again on nature as capital. So this makes me positive, but we have some homework to do. But let's attack this and let's drive this all together in the right direction.
Markus, I cannot stop smiling because I never thought I will live to hear such statements from a person from the financial sector. I spent the last 25 years of my life trying to measure natural capital and integrate these measurements, these values into allocation and investment decisions, because I am convinced that this is the only practical and the only science consistent way to integrate natural capital in all production and consumption decisions together with human capital and produce capital. I loved your intervention and I am truly in agreement with what you are proposing, and I am extremely happy that I hear this from the financial sector. I hope you can really mobilize other financial institutions across these lines. Thank you very much. There are many questions. I will ask these questions, and also Adolf, my colleague Adolf Kloke Lesch, will also intervene to moderate this discussion. But let's first finish the first round of comments. The next speaker is Peter Schmidt, President of NAT section from the European Economic and Social Committee, a person who we work with a lot, supports UN SDSN a lot, and is the crucial representation of the civil society at the Commission. Peter?
Thank you very much, Phoebe, and thanks a lot for this invitation. And I hope that we can come into the end to a positive approach, which is, as Markus already said, not that easy if we see all the complexity in this. Dirk started in describing the crisis. If you allow, Dirk, I would like to extend this analysis on crisis also with a social dimension, saying we are already for decades in a social crisis on the planet. And this, I do not only have a look on this, as you said, the so-called global south. So we have it already also in the so-called developed countries. So we are facing a tremendous social crisis, and my prediction is this will increase in the face of the crisis which you have been described in your interventions. And this is for me one key element what we have to talk about when we talk about really a shift on system shift, because if people do not have real access and to only simple issues, clean water, communication, energy, foods, healthy foods. All this is dependent on that, whether we can keep our understanding of democracy as we have it. So that's for me the first point. And I would like to come, Markus, with a clear, a simple. You would consider it perhaps as a wrong solution, but I think we know what is on risk. It's not that we do not know what is on risk. You mentioned that, the risk on biodiversity, the risk of livelihood of people. And the SDGs is a program which has given us really at first time a frame where policymakers can have an orientation in their policymaking process. Our problem in the past was, and I think we have to address really in the analysis, where are key elements which has led to the situation in where we are. And this is a discussion. This is extremely difficult. When I discussed it here in the ESC, and I come, of course, with a few of the civil society, the organized civil society in Europe, that's the ESC. And when I arrived 2014, before the UN agenda was signed, and said we must have systemic approaches. We have been the first calling for a comprehensive food policy in Europe to have systemic views on that. And I always raised one important point when we talk about our current capitalism, which was built only on money making. We put healthcare service to money making. We put all public goods into money making. And now we are surprised that these systems are not working. That's clear for me, because this is one of the biggest reasons why we do not come to solutions in the current discussion. So that's why what we have to do is, and that's why I fully support that and happy to hear that someone from the financial sector is coming and say, we have really to rethink our economic system. Which role has the economic system in our life and for the planet? It's not a thing which we have to say, let's see. Give an example, a very concrete example. Some of you might know my point on this. So while the taxpayer in Europe is paying about 55 billion per year in order to support farmers' life in the common agriculture policy, that's fair enough. So if we have a look at the whole food supply chain, for instance, so then is the question, what is the impact of the whole food supply chain for the planet, for people's life? And if we go step by step into this supply chain, then we see we lose thousands of farmers every year, despite this policy. We lose them because they do not get a fair share within the food supply chain in order to survive. So despite the CAP. And at the same time, we have companies, they have a profit on the turnover on 20%. And no one can explain me what is sustainable in a system like that, when some of them, they take they grab the biggest share, and the other one, they just get, that they can survive. And if I translate this into the global situation, then we have the same situation. The so-called developed countries in the world, they take the wealth and will leave the global south alone with their problems. And then we come and make our policies, which are important. European Green Deal, Farm to Fork Strategy, Repower EU, Fit for 55. These are all, I would say, supportive measures, and we have to support this. The problem now is that we have groups, different groups, farmers associations, not all, some of them, employers associations, coming, some of the trade unions, I'm a trade unionist, so coming and say, now, with these green issues, we should stop now because we have a crisis. We have a crisis. I heard that when we had the COVID crisis. I hear that now in the war crisis, saying, no, we can't do that now because this is too expensive, and the people we go to the street. So, and this is a totally wrong approach. We should fight that this shouldn't be allowed, that all these programs have to be stopped. We must do exactly the opposite. We must call for much more engagement. And we organized, and I will finish here, Phoebe, that we do not grab too much time. We organized last week, and thanks Minister Enrico Giovannini, that you joined us in this conference here in the ESC, the Sustainable Economy We Need conference, where we talked about the well-being economy and what is to be done. We had also Sandrine Dixon from the Club of Rome there, in order to explain from the civil society's perspective what we do. We will introduce, and together with an alliance, and civil society roadmap, in order to come to a well-being economy which serves for the planet and for the people. This is just one example what we have to do, and we have to fight for them. And this is, to a certain extent, a bit ridiculous and frustrating. Since I'm a trade unionist, I know what means fighting, but we have to do it. We have to do it every day, because we must build a counter narrative to this nonsense that this is no longer now that we have to go back to business as usual. And that's why I'm happy to have this kind of initiatives, and whenever it's possible to join them. And to go into details means we must really clarify as civil society, we are on the track to make the shift. And I'm happy to discuss with Markus from the financial sector as a trade unionist, what is to be done in order to deliver, to provide an economic model which is ready to save the planet. On one point, I would disagree. It's not necessary that it's getting worse. At first, that it comes better in the end. So we should avoid this. We must make it now, or not waiting. We have to do it now. Everything is on the table, and that's I'm really happy that we have one of our allies as a minister in Italy. I mean, come on, Enrico. Now you have it in your hand, and we're going to follow the example of Italy. Thank you very much, Phoebe.
Thank you, Peter.
No, Peter, we are on the same side. We are on the same side. We are on the same side. I just say that I fear that it has to get worse before it's getting better, although I agree that we have everything what we need, but maybe society is sometimes slow in adapting to realities, right? So, but on your side, yes.
Or maybe the tipping point will arrive faster than we think. So as it happened with, the energy transition, tipping points are not easy to predict, so we can keep hopeful. But let me say to Peter that I agree. The time of crisis is the right time to get on the right pathway, not stay on the wrong pathway. So we should use this crisis, and we should make sure that the fiscal space that this crisis created, at least in Europe, should be transformative and really allow investments in the real economy to happen, public investments, but also attract the interest of private investments. So it's not this supply side boost should not be just a consumption boost, but it should really be accelerating investments in the real economy that will be in the structure of public-private partnerships. Let me go to Massamba Thioye, Project Executive of UNFCCC Global Innovation Hub. And let me ask him, the vast majority of the world's capital, we know that it requires investment themes where profits are made at sufficient level to reward bold action and risk-taking and allowing reinvestment in the future, and at the same time providing employment, taxes, social security, pensions. And we need these investments to provide all this today. So do we have the skills? Did we really invest in upskilling and reskilling in order to have the capacity to use the technological advancements and make the investments that will bring profit, safeguard the cohesion of the society, and protect the environment? Massamba?
Thank you, Phoebe. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our participants. Very pleased to be part of this panel. So I think what you are asking, whether investment is done to support addressing the big challenge the world is facing, the response would be no, so far no, but it has to be done, and for very simple reason. So currently we are facing, everybody is talking about a financial crisis around the corner, and there are two main reasons for that. The first is the very low interest rate, risk-free negative interest rate in some cases, and the fact that people consider that inflation will be soon here at very important level. So if you are in a situation where you have low interest rate and inflation, it means that investors do not know really what to do with their money. For me, there is a huge opportunity, because there is something that is clear in our mind. This is that the core human needs that are to be satisfied are currently satisfied through value chain that do not fit in a 1.5 degree world. So we know that we have value chain currently that are obsolete, and we will need to continue to satisfy the core human need that they are currently satisfying. So what does it mean? It means that we will need to develop alternative value chain for the satisfaction of some of our core human need. And for me, it provides a huge opportunity for investment. Currently, one of the approaches that we are taking to ensure that the SDGs are taken holistically, because this is also one of the problems. For me, the SDGs provide a very, very interesting framework. But when it comes to implementation, this is where we are facing problem, because we tended to implement them in silo, separately. And also when we are implementing them, the focus is, let's say, very local. So what people are focusing on is, how can I implement the SDGs in my jurisdiction? And lack of cooperation. And we need to recognize that the level of cooperation that we have currently is not enough to address the big challenge that we are facing. So this is why, in the context of climate action, what we are now trying to do is to change the perspective, and instead of, let's say, putting focus when we are talking about climate action on the sectoral level, we would like to go back to the basics. So focus on people and on planet. And to do so, we change a little bit the perspective. Instead of asking the question, how we can leverage innovative solution to reduce, for example, carbon footprint of product and services at the sectoral level, we frame the question differently. And the question that we are asking is how climate and sustainability solution can be developed to support the development of alternative value chain that can satisfy the core human need while being aligned with the 1.5 degree goal, while increasing biodiversity, and while supporting regeneration. And if you do so, what is really interesting here is you end up identifying type of climate action that are the most transformative one, and use of innovative solution in the most transformative way. I would like just to provide here one example. So when we are talking about decarbonizing the transport sector, the focus is on how do we replace combustion car with electric vehicle, which is extremely important. But before asking this question, the first question is, why do we need car at the first place? Because electric vehicle is better than combustion car for sure. And as I mentioned, we need to put effort on making this transformation, but having less car is even better. So the first question is, why do we need car? And then if we need car for mobility, we need to ask ourselves, why do we need mobility? This is mainly for access to product and services. We can maybe redesign our cities so that the product and services that we need are available at walking and biking distance, which would require less car. So here, the fact that we are going back to the core human need, and instead of making climate action a pure decarbonization agenda, but considering it like a development agenda, but a development agenda that need to be aligned with the 1.5 degree goal that need to enhance biodiversity and support regeneration. By doing so, this is where actually you identify the most transformative type of climate action, and you expand the space for climate action to capture those initiatives that wouldn't appear if you simply focus at the sectoral level. And this approach allowed to consider climate action as integral part of development action, and innovation for climate become part of innovation for sustainability. So first problem, we should not consider the SDGs separately, but they need to be considered holistically. The second problem is the fact that we are short-termist and also focusing only locally. We are not collaborating. And for me, this is a very important challenge, and it brings me to the question that Dirk asked about the crisis and collaboration in these specific cases. So what I believe is working together breaks down barrier to communication and collaboration. An inclusive and participatory collective transnational effort going beyond political divide can contribute actually in creating a community of practice, making connection among involved nations, and aligning vision for a sustainable world as well as strategy and operation to get there. I don't think that exclusion is a solution, and any opportunity to collaborate need to be seized. This is through collaboration that we can value the contribution of others and build an environment of trust. The radical collaboration required for the achievement of the SDGs require a very high level of trust. Now, the good news is that there is a virtuous circle between collaboration and trust. The more nations collaborate, the more they develop self-awareness, awareness of others, and self-accountability, which enhance trust. And the more nations trust, the more they are open and have collaboration intention. Now, there is a current and strong call for nations to be independent, and the question is whether we should aim at independence or interdependency and radical collaboration. Being dependent is presented as unhealthy, and the value of independence overinflated in my view. So instead of inviting country to be self-contained, we need to promote more collaboration. Interdependency suggests that the entities recognize and value the importance of radical collaboration while maintaining a solid sense of self within the collaboration, without any need to compromise their identity and their value system. Taken to an extreme, independence can reduce for nations the understanding of the need for deep collaboration with others in a meaningful way. radical collaboration with other nations can be perceived as not particularly valuable and difficult to achieve for countries with an extraordinary sense of independence. Interdependence can be healthy as it involves a balance of self of others within the collaboration, if it is radical collaboration, where we recognize all entities collaborating and they are working to meet common goal, as well as others' core need in appropriate and meaningful way. It promotes a mindset of problem solving and negotiation instead of competition, facilitate co-creation, and is inspired by the desire to learn from, offer, and embrace diverse perspectives within the process of problem scoping, idea generation, solution finding, and innovation. A great illustration of that is the UNFCCC negotiation process. I must say that I'm always full of hope when I see all the negotiators of a given agenda item celebrating an agreement in which each of them has made compromise. This is what interdependency is all about, in my view, and we need to further promote this because this is the future. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you, Massamba. Indeed, even COVID has proven that the world is as resilient as the last person and country in it. And it is so important to understand that the SDGs cannot be implemented by working in silos. Yeah. And I think what you said, that we should conceive our transformation on a systems approach, simultaneously addressing multiple objectives and promoting the right mixture of policy instruments, cohesion instruments, education, upskilling, reskilling instruments, and technological solutions that can be used across the various sectors of the economy and across the various states. In collaboration and in coordination, it's the only way forward. And I loved your positive message that more collaboration creates trust, and it's a vicious circle of value. That was very nice, and allow me to use it from now on. Thank you very much, Massamba. Now I would like to turn to the minister of our panel, Minister Giovannini, Minister of Sustainable Infrastructure and Mobility of Italy. I was so impressed by your speech in Rome 2 weeks ago. It was the first leader that I've heard, and I knew that you were a thought leader together with a political leader. But it was the first time that I heard an explicit SDG-based assessment that could be implemented right away in a ministry in order to decide investment allocation. And I think this is inspiring and a leadership example. So I will not ask anything in particular, but we would like your thoughts about the way forward. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I hope that you can hear me and see me well. Great. Well. Thank you to Angelo, Riccaboni, and all the others for organizing this event and this school. As he said, we discussed about these possibilities several years ago, because unfortunately, it takes time to implement dreams. And in some cases, we are awakened by horrible dreams, as the war that we are facing in Europe. In other cases, we get very good ideas during dreams, then have to be implemented. So being a dreamer is not a bad thing at all, but what we need to speed up is the implementation. And the comments made before correctly highlighted some of the elements that prevented our world to dream about what we are talking about for a long time. I'm just saying that because I decided to become an economist the second year of the university in 1976, so just a few months ago, just learning about the content of the famous Club of Rome's report on the limits to growth. So fortunately or unfortunately, I know since that time that around 2030, 2020, 2030, the world would have faced an incredible challenge in terms of a perfect storm. And a publication, a book published in Italy a few years ago was exactly entitled The Perfect Storm, because already years ago we knew that between 2020 and 2030, a lot of events, non-linear events, could have happened, and unfortunately, they're happening. So let me start with few provocative questions. First, are we on a sustainable path? The answer is clearly no. And all the comments made by the panelists clearly say that we are not on a sustainable path. Are we on a more sustainable pathway compared to 2015? In some respects, maybe, but in other respects, we are getting worse. And this was not necessarily what we had dreamed about when the UN agreed on the 2015, the 2030 agenda. Third point, have we better understood the challenges and the opportunities to take the world onto a sustainable pathway compared to 7 years ago? Definitely yes. Because both in the public and in the private sector, we heard about that before. The mindset of many people have changed, is changed. In some cases slightly, in other cases radically. But I think that the awareness of the unsustainability of our condition, first. Second, the interconnectedness of the different elements. Third, the fact that without a big paradigm shift, as Peter Schmidt said, there is no way to get onto a sustainable pathway. Then, of course, we have all the limitations, we have all the problems, we have all the slow changes that were mentioned before. And this confirms the fact that we are late. If the world had fully understood these opportunities, but also challenges 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, we would have been in a much better position. Fourth question. Is there still people who believe that the neoliberal capitalism will fix all the problems that we are facing? Unfortunately, yes, but much less than 7 years ago. The problem is that we have not yet a new conceptual framework that is taught in universities, is used to retrain the current leaders in companies, but also in the public sector. Therefore, this cultural shift is lower than what we would need to have. Notwithstanding that, there are great exceptions. And I think that we should celebrate these exceptions in order to learn from what's going on. As a former chief statistician of the OECD, I would suggest to go beyond the indicators that go beyond GDP. Of course, with Peter, we talked about this but if we stick to indicators, we risk of missing what's happening in terms of governance, in terms of new regulation changes, and so on and so forth, which are not measured through indicators. While listening to you, I went to my personal history, just going back to 2001, when at the OECD, we developed the framework to measure the different forms of capital within the report on measuring sustainable development. Some progress has been made, especially on the environmental side, but on the social side and the human capital side, statisticians were not able to agree with the experts in this field measures of capital, social and human capital in an agreed way. On top, statisticians are quite slow in embedding these new concepts in the system of national accounts. And I'm very disappointed by the fact that this year, the UN Statistical Commission, discussing about the reform of the system of national accounts, was quite prudent, notwithstanding 20 years of research and great experiences in some field. Then I went back to 2015, not only when the 2030 Agenda was signed, but when with a few friends and colleagues, we published a brief article on The Guardian that you can find on the net. And they decided, the Guardian decided to change the title that we had proposed into "Say Goodbye to Capitalism and Say Hello and Say Welcome to the Republic of Well-Being." It's a short article written with Bob Costanza and Fioramonti and others that try to figure out what a brand new country should have done in order to be SDG based. So we had listed these elements. First, put the sustainability into the constitution. It's a brand new country. Huh? So the first thing that this country should do is to write down the constitution. Second, think about the portfolios in government going beyond the usual stovepipe approach. And we were saying even companies should do the same. Third, statistical measures that go beyond GDP and measure sustainable development. Fourth, change the discount rates, which are used for cost-benefit analysis, which are too favorable oriented and don't take into account the risks of unsustainability. Fourth, design an impact assessment SDG proof. And finally, fight in the international organizations arena to define norms, agreements, treaties that incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals. General de Gaulle would have said, oh, vast agenda. But I'm pleased to say that for me, especially in this second experience as minister, This was a sort of map. And I'm glad to say that we have included sustainability in the Constitution this year, that we have changed the names of our ministry, but also the Ministry for Ecological Transition was formed merging energy and environment, the Ministry for Digital Transformation, and so on and so forth. In Italy, thanks to the efforts that we made at this Italian Statistical Office, we have a lot of good statistical measures, which are widely used also in policies. Cost-benefit analysis, we are still working on that, let me say. But ex-ante impact assessment, the Prime Minister issued a directive saying that from now on, all the plans for new infrastructures, new big investments have to be tested through a study that compares the impact of these new investment vis-a-vis the 17 goals. And then international norms, and I'm happy to say that Europe has become, I would say, from a legal perspective and also from a policy perspective, indeed one of the big champions of sustainable development worldwide. With this current commission, this legislature, the aims of achieving SDGs, the concept of resilience has been embedded in European policies, and I could continue. What I'm trying to argue here is that change is possible. Is it enough? No, as the reality is telling us around. But in face of the energy crisis that is happening in Europe, and not only due to the Ukraine war, the reaction once more from the European Union is to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy solutions. Although in the short run, we need to have short-term solutions that are not necessarily in line with the long-term, so there will be additional costs. But we are trying to take this opportunity to speed up the transition, not to slow down. Also for economic reasons and for geopolitical reasons. So let me conclude with three final comments. First, again, the question, can we change? Yes, we can. And Europe is a good European Union is a good example from this point of view. Let me tell you another anecdote that was directly linked to my experience there as one of the advisors to the cabinet of the previous president of the Commission, President Juncker. After a couple of years of work there, I was told by the head of the cabinet of the president that I should have stopped talking about sustainable development and resilience. Because the Commission, he said, would have never taken into account these terms and this vision. Beside the fact that a few years later, I would say 3-0 in soccer terms, but it's interesting to share with you why he was saying that. He was a brilliant person, an incredible person, because he said there is no way to tell people that the future is going to be full of shocks. Which means that for politicians, this is a hard selling. And it was necessary to go through the pandemic to have the current president, von der Leyen, jumping on the work that we had done after stopping work for the head of the cabinet, but with a joint research center, to develop the overall system and political thinking about shocks and resilience, but in the terms of transformative resilience, where the objective is not to jump back where you were before the crisis, but to jump forward. This is exactly where we are now. We are facing unexpected shocks, undesired shocks. But again, I think that if we try to understand the logic of the transformative resilience, we can learn from our mistakes and the current situation to inject a non-linear change, positive, not necessarily negative, in order to jump back to the hypothetically designed pathway towards sustainability. And the very last remark. From an academic point of view, the number of voices that are talking about these issues is growing everywhere, but maybe still with a divide between North and South, between West and East. And therefore, we need to speed up also in this case, the contamination of new thinking. I will be in Davos next week at the World Economic Forum, where we were working on these issues there 10 years ago. But then there was an optimism that unfortunately was not so justified. So some of these elements were put aside. But I'm just mentioning this because looking at the future risk report that the World Economic Forum publishes every year, we see still how far we are from the capacity of predicting the real risks. And the nonlinearities are making this job very difficult. And this is where I think the academic and the research world need to put aside models used in the past in order to help policymakers, companies, planners, and politicians to identify possible changes, quick changes, positive changes, able to face and counter balance the risks that we are and the downsizes that we are seeing now. We need to do that, and it's important that this goes well spread around the world because we don't have much time to make this change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very insightful talk. Indeed, you've raised so many issues. I loved the entry points of creating a new country where you have sustainability in the constitution, you have national accounts that allow measurement of not only produced capital, but natural capital and social capital and human capital together. And of course, it uses impact assessment models and on discount rates, very, very important. Actually, we did a study for the Prime Minister of the UK back in my Cambridge years, exactly on that, and actually introduce ways to handle the intergenerational justice of exponential discounting. And actually, if you go back to the Ramsey equations and introduce uncertainty and even ambiguity in the growth rate of the country, then it is quite, it becomes mathematically tractable to prove that declining discount rates over time are the correct social discount rate, and in this way you protect the interest of the future generations. It would be great to continue this conversation with Italy and you in the context of the new climate hub that SDSN is putting together to provide support to governments for pathways to implementing the SDGs, and in particular SDG 13 on climate change. So it was truly like a lecture at the lecture theater of a university. We are all very appreciative. You should see the messages that are coming. And indeed, with regards to risk, it's a risk, of course, and it's something a bit more than a risk. It's also ambiguity when you don't know the probabilities because you have not studied the phenomena, because the phenomena are quite new, and this is an additional challenge, and it is really very difficult to handle. Thank you very much. I hope we meet at the World Economic Forum in Davos next week. We are running a very big SDG lab. I will send you an invitation. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is, of course, the person who put us all together, who is this force that created this amazing network of sustainability thinkers across the world. Jeff, it was, I saw that you've followed Minister's Giovannini intervention. And basically, we want your thoughts on how, in this midst of multiple crises, the pandemic, the economic crisis and inflation, even stagflation, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the huge geopolitical crisis, how can we raise interest at these crucial times to use the blueprint of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs to make the leap to a sustainable pathway? Is there any hope to do that?
Of course, there is hope. And good afternoon, Enrico. Thank you for brilliant remarks and your brilliant leadership. And Phoebe, thank you so much for all that you're doing, and so many friends on the line. So I'm delighted to be together with everybody. There's an old saying, of course, that when you are falling deeper into a hole, the first rule is stop digging. In other words, stop putting yourself even into more trouble. A huge number of our crises are man-made and are actually the result of deliberate or expected results of bad policies. And we need to stop that, because we also have an investment agenda which requires real resources and real devotion of time and human capital. The first thing we need to do is stop this war in Ukraine and stop this talk of one side defeating the other as opposed to ending the war. And this is the first mistake we're making. In my country, the United States, we are not talking about sustainable development. We're talking about global alliances and dividing the world. This is extremely dangerous. Biden is in Asia today, not to make peace, not to reach out to China, but to strengthen the anti-China alliance, as if there weren't enough problems in the world. The US mindset is that the crucial challenge of our world today is democracy versus autocracy. I completely disagree with this point of view. The crucial challenge in our world today is cooperation to address the needs of people, whether it is ending poverty, social justice, or environmental sustainability. And if we have a mindset of division, we will absolutely destroy everything. And the crisis in Europe right now is deep, and it's going to be deeper soon if we don't take the off-ramp to peace. Europe will soon be in an economic downturn. The United States probably soon afterwards, a global crisis deepening. And the US mindset is to deepen it even further. For no sensible reason, we are on a nonstop attack against China and an arms-only or military-only approach to Ukraine. So to my mind, this is actually the first principle of these crises, not just to adapt to them, not just to try to keep our agenda alive in the midst of these crises, but to draw attention to the fundamental problems that are leading to these crises. And I think the US mindset is among the most dangerous of all. I've been warning about this for decades, but it really accelerated in the last 5 years, which is dividing the world between a US alliance and a China alliance, and viewing Russia as an intractable enemy. There's a lot to say on this, but I would just say that if the United States had not pushed NATO enlargement, we would not have this war. That's, by the way, an unpopular view, but it is a true view. And it's based on a voluminous amount of evidence. And when we had the chance for an off-ramp last year with Putin saying, you have blocked us in the Black Sea, you have extended NATO to Bulgaria, to Romania, you want to extend it to Georgia and to Ukraine, and take a look at the map, you are blocking us from the Black Sea and therefore from the Mediterranean, therefore from the world. Please stop. Biden's answer was no, we don't even discuss this issue. And so my view is we need an off-ramp to this war based on non-NATO enlargement, Ukraine's neutrality, guaranteed Russia's complete withdrawal from Ukraine, and we could win the international support for such an agenda. Right now, we don't have international support for Ukraine even, because most of the world does not support NATO enlargement. So this is just an example of how we're creating trouble. We're creating trouble in Asia because China is not our enemy. We may not agree with China's statecraft, which has a 2,000-year-old tradition, and that's China's statecraft. But to view China as the mortal threat to the world is wrong. And so this is another area where we're going to destroy the chance of cooperation if we don't get our thinking straight. I've been going to China many times a year for almost every year of the past quarter century and since 41 years. Many of my students are senior Chinese officials now in top echelons of the government. They are not enemies. And our mindset that this is some existential battle, which is Biden's mindset, is an American fantasy that Europe should not buy into. So this is a second point. Third, we don't know, by the way, whether we created this pandemic or not. I have an article published today in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences pointing out strong scientific reasons for believing that this virus emerged from US-based technology out of a laboratory. It's not guaranteed, but it is absolutely possible. And what I do today in the PNAS with a co-author is call for an independent investigation of the US sites, NIH, University of North Carolina, EcoHealth Alliance, and others who were partnering research, extremely dangerous research, on genetic recombination of SARS-like viruses. But what I can tell you is that whether the US created this virus or not, we didn't cooperate to stop the virus. We lacked international cooperation on breaking transmission and on vaccine distribution. Trump walked out of WHO in the middle of 2020, accusing it of being pro-China. He attacked China as being the creator of the virus, but if the virus was created, believe me, it came out of US technology, and I could give you a several-hour lecture explaining that. But we went to battle, geopolitical battle over this virus. We have not had a meeting of senior vaccine officials of Europe, the US, and China sitting down together to talk about how to get vaccine coverage, because the US doesn't believe in cooperation. That's our mindset right now. I asked a White House official, why hasn't the US sat with China on the vaccines? He said, we invited them, but they didn't come. I said, why didn't they come? He said, because we also invited Taiwan. So instead of solving the problem, they made it a geopolitical problem. That's another way that we get this seriously wrong. So this is really our problem. So many of our crises are at this point exacerbated by our own actions. The sanctions regime, which could make sense if we had negotiations going on, in the absence of negotiations is going to cause a worldwide economic crisis. It's obvious. And so unless we have a sanctions route that says we're a negotiation path that says we're using sanctions, but there's an off-ramp, then all we're doing is destroying. We're not even giving the way out. And all of the talk that we're going to defeat a nuclear superpower, defeat on the battlefield, is reckless American thinking. So what do we need to do? We need to stop the war. We need to cooperate on the pandemic. And then we can turn to our agenda, which is hard enough. And I think on the agenda, what Minister Giovannini was emphasizing is we need new tools, because our governments are not really up to this, or many of them aren't. Italy's is right now. It's got these incredible ministers, incredible prime minister. Greece is terrific, same way. I know, however, how many governments around the world are saying this is too complicated. We don't have an agenda. We don't know how to do this kind of forward planning. We don't even have the tools for it. That's why we are building a climate hub in Athens that Phoebe is leading with colleagues, so that it can support governments with new kinds of analytical tools for 20 or 30 year ahead planning. That's why the European Green Deal is so important, because it is the most comprehensive statement of goals anywhere in the world. And when Minister Giovannini said that Europe is among the leaders, Europe is the leader, bar none, on this. And now we have to do everything to actually turn these detailed objectives into operational guideposts for governments, into metrics, timelines, public investment plans, regulatory frameworks, so that actually the investments will proceed in the appropriate way. When it comes to interest in the SDGs, part of my life is every day speaking with government officials, every day from all over the world. The amazing thing about the SDG agenda is that there is high interest in it everywhere. almost everywhere, not in the US government, but almost everywhere else. By the way, you will not find the US government even saying sustainable development goals as a matter of principle, which is bizarre. And the principle is we don't want to be asked for more money. So they don't mention the words. But for everywhere else, I've been in Kinshasa, I've been in Buenos Aires, I've been in Cairo, I've been in Kuala Lumpur, just in recent weeks, I've been in Berlin. Everywhere there's interest, high interest in this. So we don't have a lack of interest. We need the know-how, we need the peace in the world. And then the final point that I'll mention is we need the financing, because fundamentally this is a financing strategy. This is to shift part of global saving into 6 high priority areas: education, health, green energy, sustainable land use, urban agriculture, urban infrastructure, and digital technologies. And so we need the public investment agenda, and we need the financing to support it. The problem that I'm trying to grapple with right now is that the bottom half of the world income distribution, the low income countries and the lower middle income countries, 82 countries which have a combined population of 3.9 billion people, does not have access to the private capital markets. Only 3 of those 82 countries have an investment grade credit rating. Even though those are the countries that are the most capital scarce, they don't get the capital flows. I think that this is because of the wrong way of thinking about this issue, not because they are intrinsically more dangerous or intrinsically less remunerative in terms of lending, but because they lack the liquidity, the credit ratings are done incorrectly, the IMF World Bank debt sustainability analysis is not analytically sound. Despite many of my students in the senior reaches of the IMF, they are writing papers saying, here's a better way to do it. Countries should be borrowing a lot more than they're borrowing. They should have access to low-cost, long-term finance to really build digital infrastructure, to really build green energy, which is low cost, but very capital intensive, and therefore needing upfront investment flows. But the international capital markets are not working. So I'm co-chairing a task force with the Deputy Secretary General of the UN to make recommendations to the G20 by July on how to increase the flows of finance for the low income and lower middle income countries substantially. Our basic 2 answers are, first, through the multilateral development banking system, which should be lending annually maybe 5 times what they're lending now. Instead of 100 billion a year, 500 billion a year. And the second is through a reconceptualization of the credit risk and the debt sustainability and the institutional mechanisms behind that to enable vastly larger private flows to sovereign borrowers and, of course, to complementary business investment. So let me stop there. Just to conclude, the agenda is strongly supported almost everywhere. We need to stop dividing the world and end the conflicts and cooperate on ending this pandemic, which continues to be very dangerous. And we need new tools of governance that spur much larger flows of investment. And that is the agenda, I would say, of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Indeed, funding the gap, finding the money to fund SDG implementation is now crucial, and the two pathways that you identified are probably the most prominent ones, the most promising around increasing lending to the multilateral development banks to provide the low-income development countries funding, and also increases support of UN member states for existing green funds. How about tax reforms on mega wealth? Is that something you are considering on closing the funding gap for the SDGs in this task force that you're leading?
I'm sorry, I lost the last minute. Is
the taxing mega wealth another source of funding that could be used for closing the funding gap for implementing the SDGs? Is this something you're considering?
I think that there are several different new funding sources. The most obvious is we should be levying a carbon levy on the high-income countries, both for their ongoing carbon emissions and for their historical emissions. And if you do a simple calculation of putting just $5 a ton of CO2 from the high-income country emissions and $2.50 a ton from the upper middle income countries, that's $100 billion. If you put that through the multilateral development banks and leverage that, that's $500 billion a year of low-cost climate financing, for example. So this is, I'd say, the simplest way. Of course, the second way is taxing the roughly $13 trillion of wealth in the hands of 3,000 people in the world, the 3,000 billionaires. This is also a no-brainer, and except for the fact that they run a lot of governments. And so this is what we should be. We need to be doing this anyway. We need digital taxation on big tech in any event. And look at how that was resisted by the United States when Europe proposed very sensibly taxing.
It's in the European, I mean, the European Commission has suggested that and will move forward with the own resources package, this source of funding for also covering for the RFFs. Yeah, I wanted to ask Minister Giovannini now if he can come back. Minister, can you hear us? Okay, because Jeff has criticized the US and said that Europe is a leadership example. Are we a leadership example, or are we introverted? Are we focused? We are very Eurocentric. I mean, Dirk said that we came up with the European Green Deal without negotiating, without speaking with our African neighbors. Are we really a leadership example, or do we need to get much better?
Two things. The first one is that even United States had developed its federal level, trying to react at federal level to crisis. So even the federal level of the United States was built crisis after crisis, not necessarily because it was perfectly designed by the fathers, let's say, of the country. And the European Union is going through, unfortunately, a similar process. Pandemia was a big shock, and then the Next Generation EU program. Now we have another big shock, and the proposal is to really speed up the energy union, plus what? The problem here is the understanding from the EU point of view. I'm not just talking about the leaders, I'm talking about the entire set of institutions, that if there will be problems in future with East, we need to quickly look at other sides, which means mainly South, as in the Nordic Sea, there isn't too much people there with whom we can develop economic relationships and so on. What does it mean? This means Balkans, this means Africa, this means India, and of course Arab Gulf states. So my prediction at this stage is not anything more than just a prediction, is that Europe will look at these sides of the world much strongly than before. And this is a great opportunity, even for Italy, given its geographical position, but it's an opportunity for everybody. And the transformative resilience that I was talking about before is exactly about these transformations, taking the bad things that happen to try to rethink about our choices. This is just an example, but on the other side, I hope that the European Union will accelerate its political integration. We have learned through these two crises, pandemic and energy shock, that any single country is too small compared to the dimension of the challenges we have, not only ahead, but we have now. Therefore, I really hope that the European Union will be able to get this chance to speed up also in terms of political integration.
Every country is too small to live up to the challenges that we are facing. On this note, I will give the floor to Adolf. He has been gathering questions from the audience. There are really many, in the hundreds. So, Adolf.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you to all the speakers and all the participants. It's more than 200 who listen to this call, and I think it's really excellent and wonderful, in particular, how far the global reach of this webinar is going. I cannot collect all the questions that have been put into the chat. I will just highlight a few. I then suggest that we follow the list of the speakers as we started, so that each of them has 3 to 4 minutes to respond and give his final views on the discussion we just have. The first, let me start with, there are many suggestions that relate to concrete actions in sectors like agriculture, like communities, like linked research and local communities. I think we cannot dig deeper into that. What I found interesting was the issue of who is the we are referring to. That was a question that was put very early in the discussion. We always talk of we. Also, Jeff, you talked of we. So is the we the global community? Is the we the West? I don't think so. But sometimes we argue between us who come from Europe or North America as the we would be we the West. No, we are the global community. So my first question is, out of all the many comments, who actually are the ones who should now take the lead? There was an issue on who should take the lead globally and in Europe on driving the agenda forward. And this relates to 2 dimensions. The one is the global leadership of the European Union, and the other obviously is the domestic implementation within the EU. And Jeff, you are right. If you talk to political leaders in in most places of the world, they still cherish the SDGs. And actually, this is the only agenda, together with the climate agenda, that unites the world community. and instead of dividing it, and therefore provides a wonderful basis. But how to turn that into operational politics and policies? And I think that is still a huge problem. So what actually hinders politicians to integrate the SDGs into their day-to-day working, also into their day-to-day reaction on the crisis? I think that was the second complex of questions relating to the economic system, to directing financial flows, and so forth. And then there was also a point on the future of the oil and gas industry. But let me just put the last question, that was the issue, whether there will be SDGs beyond 2030. So we are in the midst of implementing the SDGs, obviously. We have huge difficulties and setbacks now. So people start thinking of what to do about the SDGs we are not going to achieve in the next couple of years, and how to drive the agenda forward. And the last word, we should not only think of today and this year, but of next year, when the world community comes together another time to review the SDGs. And how can Europe build a coalition, a real coalition, a global coalition that works for the SDGs? And Jeff, I would just like to cite some of the American politicians who said the mission determines the coalition. And if the mission we are faced with is saving people and planet, then we need a completely different coalition to the coalitions that are built nowadays. So I would now like to invite Dirk to answer and to get back to the questions in the chat. Maybe, Dirk, you have read some of them yourself. So I would suggest 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Thank you, Adolf. 4 quick points, 4 headlines in 3 minutes. So the first headline is that those who know me in this group know that I'm by character actually an optimist. So I agree with those who have been saying we have a global consensus on the sustainability and climate agenda. We have concepts for that. Markus, we have money for that. We can finance this actually, the European Green Deal. So we have been making progress in several regards. This is fine. Second point, European Green Deal. I think we are in trouble. Beyond these kind of positive trends, we are in trouble. So that's my second point is at the level of the European Green Deal. On the one hand side, Jeff mentioned this, the minister mentioned this, Peter, you also know. We have an acceleration of the energy transition. I think this is correct to state. On the other hand side, I see three shifts which are making me nervous regarding the implementation of the European Green. First, we have a shift in political attention. Many things are more important now than the European Green Deal. Look at the agricultural perspective, the agricultural agenda. Second shift, we have a shift in public investments now. I mean, in the German context, it's very easy to say that we have 100 billion euros on the table for military infrastructure, and this will have repercussions everywhere. And we are seeing this in many countries. And the third element, Jeff, you talked about governance capabilities needed. Now institutional capabilities are being invested in the German context for refugee management, so an impact of the Ukraine war, and not at the local level in reorganizing the mobility system in our systems in our community. So I'm seeing these 3 shifts, and we need to fight these kind of risks. My third element goes to Jeff very briefly. Jeff, I have been talking about 7, 8 escalating global interdependency crisis since 2000. So we are stumbling from one global interdependency crisis to the next. My message to you, and I would like to discuss this in more detail in a different occasion, obviously, I think this goes beyond bad foreign policies in the US. The global cooperation crisis which we have goes much deeper. I talked about the mistrust between global South and Western countries, and this is my third element. My fourth element is then that, I mean, big crises have always been, or very often been, moments for bold decisions. So therefore, asking ourselves now, what can we do to leapfrog actually on many fronts of what we have been talking about? Remember 94, the end of Second World War. We got the United Nations, we got the process of the European integration, Peter. at the end of Second World War. This has been prepared during the last 2 years of the most terrible war we ever saw in human civilization. So how can we use this moment to try to leapfrog towards the goals which we have been debating this afternoon? I think this is what we have to talk about now. Adolf, you mentioned this, which partners, with which allies, and Markus then, which funds, which investments, and Jeff then, which kind of governance mechanisms and instruments we know about can we put to the front now? Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk. I now turn to Markus, and maybe you focus, if you like, on the issues on how to change the direction of the economic system.
Yeah, so to change the direction of the economic system, we have to display more or less the attributes of the potential investments, right? So this is what investors globally do assess when they make an investment decision at the financial market. They analyze data and information to build the expectation based on this available information. And the more information and good information we make available for investors, the better they will be able to make respective decisions. So really talking and highlighting on the one side, transformation, reputation, liability, and also physical risk in the context of the so-called old economy, and showing on the other side opportunities in the sense of what does a new designed economic model provide, not just to investors, but also to the societies, because one fear of change is losing out. But this change, what we have today discussed, doesn't mean we lose. It means we can win, but we need to show what we can win. This is currently the problem of us experts here in this group, to make those information available. Again, we need to get to the ground and to discuss with the government, what does it mean if we change your economic model towards a nature-based economic model? What is in for your society? How does the job change? And I always use a very simple example. Why don't we need, no one would question to have a ranger in the forest. We can also have coral rangers. So this is a new job. Instead of building artificial breakwater, which are far more expensive and are just a defense mechanism, instead of a living construction, which adapts automatically to change of our environment and provides food and provides a job at the same time. Sounds like a win-win situation. We need to discover this via data. So maybe very quickly, based on this, I think we need a polycentric approach. A polycentric approach, which I already have hinted, which also can include the Global South and local communities, which knowledge we need. And I think globalization will succeed further, but in a different way, not anymore based on trading goods, rather trading services, data, asset as a service, ideas, information. But economic activity will happen locally. Therefore, we need the local communities, and this is a huge inclusion potential program, which I already have mentioned. We need to understand that the current crisis is a chance for us to understand ourselves. Just in the relative dimension to someone else, to something which right now happens, we get a better understanding for us. I think this is a huge situation for further integration of the European Union. We should take this. I don't want to talk too positive about it, but we should think about what it is in for us. What is the next potential step we can take? It's a better self-understanding of ourselves. While that we are talking about this is already positive, because we are adapting already. We are trying to anticipate the future. This shows that we are already on our way to it. And lastly, give back dignity to the Global South and to nature. And this brings me back to the first point. A nature-based economic system will automatically be also an inclusive system and will give us the chance for development, as we already have said today. Electric cars are maybe nice, but the entire transformation, we won't manage just purely technically. We need the nature for all these aspects, and communities are based in nature, society is embedded in nature, and economy is dependent on nature. And if we get this framed with all stakeholders together, and this is we, We is the people who can lead. We can be institutions, global institutions can be the agent of positive change. But again, we need to understand, and this is nothing selfish, what is in for us? What are the green chips of tomorrow? What is the quality of the investments tomorrow? How to find out? Using the German grammar future too, and asking ourselves, what should we have done in 2022? Fix these things. Just in a kind of future two perspective, we will ask the right questions with having the right answers.
Thank you so much, Markus. I now turn to Peter, maybe with two questions, just very quick. Is there dynamic in the society towards the SDG? You are working with civil society. Is there still momentum? And secondly, again on the who and the we, do you see that European political leaders will recommit to the SDGs in a very high level manner in all the context of the crisis?
Yeah, the answer could be quite easy, and I could say yes and no. So first question, Adolf, is indeed who is we? And I really ask to involve the civil society for all policy making processes. This is so important because otherwise, as I said in the beginning, we leave people behind. If policymakers just decide, even these are good things, we have to think how we take the people with us. Give you one simple example very quickly. One windmill produces energy for around about 7,000 electric cars. So build cooperatives in the municipalities, invite the people, give them perhaps the money, and then this would be a point for Markus. Give them the money, then they would join, and they wouldn't be against this kind of energy production. So it means integration of civil society on all levels is crucial in order to come to the transition. Second question, to a certain extent, some of the European leaders, they do, some they don't. And if you have a look on this development which we had on the conference of Future of Europe, and if you go into the paper, in the last paper which is now produced, so the SDGs are not really in a prominent place. They are, I guess, twice or three times mentioned, but not just too little. So that's why this is the need that we have still to push, and we do it from our institutional point of view. For me, the last point, not to seize too much time and to stress, I would like to pick up Jeff's point in the end, when he talked about the distribution. And we must really break this taboo, not talking about taxing the rich, and tell them and look at the Oxfam report, which we got during the COP, when they said the rich people in the world are the biggest polluters, not the poor one. When we made a side meeting in the COP, we had a Nigerian lady, agricultural lady. She doesn't pollute the world. She doesn't destroy the world. These are the rich ones. So that's why we have to address that significantly and clearly. And in the future, take the resilience programs, use Ukraine rebuilding, the Marshall Plan for Ukraine, in order to build a sustainable, and this would be perhaps a model, Enrico, what you mentioned. So build and sustainable Ukraine would be now the chance to show that we give money for sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'm not sure how much additional time we have technically available. I just go on.
3 minutes.
So 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Okay,
one for Massamba, one for Jeff, and one for Enrico.
Okay, 1 minute for Massamba.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe quickly to mention some key element. Nobody should be left behind, including those that are operating currently polluting value chain. We need to find solutions that help repurpose skills and competence in this value chain, as well as the assets that are over there. Change of mindset is extremely important. We should not be reactive, but we should be voluntarist, paint the future that we want for our grandchildren, and put effort in building that future. We need to go beyond technology and know that the levels on which we need to work are multidimensional. We need to work on innovative technology, innovative financing instrument, innovative policy, business model, and also social innovation. Social innovation is critical. And finally, cooperation. As I state in my first intervention, this is critical. We need to work together, and working together is an opportunity to build trust. And this is very important to solve sustainability issue.
Thank you, Massamba. I think this is the most important takeaway from our session, working together. Enrico.
Well, I would stress the point of confidence and trust, because in a moment of international crisis, the trust among countries can really be affected very negatively, also for the reasons that Jeffrey reminded us before. How can we build a stronger trust? Be realistic in what we promise. Tell people that the way is winding and long, so without, let's say, losing their trust into the public sector, but also trying to mobilize people from the bottom, because the civil society can play a very important role in bringing together private companies, states, regions, cities, showing the common effort that is really taking place in several places of the world.
Thank you, Enrico. And Jeff, now 1 minute out of your car.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've shifted location, but two issues. One on governance. I think the future of governance is multipolar and interregional. We need a strong Europe that is interacting with a strong African Union, a strong ASEAN, and so forth. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm now in a tunnel on top of everything else.
Go on, please. Just we understand. Yeah. Go on.
Okay, so this is the first point. Global goals, global rules, interregional. And then I want to say two more points. One, it's not that I'm obsessed with US bad behavior. It is that the US plays an asymmetrical role in the world. It has, it is because of its systemic position, in a position to do a lot of damage. It has been involved in a lot of wars of choice, and it has been the protagonist of the NATO expansion to a provocative point. So it's not an obsession, it's just a practical observation that we are moving from a US predominance to a multipolar world, and we are in an instability because of that. And the US still fancies itself as the leader of the world, and all of this rallying around NATO and so forth is actually not very helpful. But the final point I want to make, because there were several people that, took offense at my remarks about the war. I am not exonerating Putin for launching a vile war, but I'm saying that there was a history to this, and it was a war end this war now that protects Ukraine. But the way to protect Ukraine is not in the idea of we win everything, because truly this is going to end up in an escalatory destruction with a very, very, and we should be prudent to understand how to.
So now I think Jeff
responds right now, and horrified at Russia's invasion, but we could negotiate and we could have avoided this war, and that's my point. And now we need to negotiate because we need to end the war and get Russia out of Ukraine. That's my point.
Wonderful. I think the clarification is to those who don't know you important. Everybody who knows you was clear about this understanding. And I think it's also a call of on Europe to show leadership in this context and not just follow commands from the other side of the Atlantic, so to speak. But I think we are not going to enter into another discussion. Phoebe, I hand back to you or to Angelo. Thank you so much.
I will give it back to Angelo, but let me say that we recognize that the gender balance was not good. But you know, there are at least another two women, Maria Cortez Bush and Maria Lendudi, who have been instrumental, not just for this, but for the whole existence and running of SDSN Europe. Maria Cortez Bush is a co-chair and also the vice president of networks of SDSN, and the amazing glue between all of us. And I thank you all for being here. I thank you all for responding so swiftly to this call. And of course, I give the floor back to Angelo, who was the person who had the vision for the Siena Sustainable Development School. And of course, he's a very big thought leader and supporter of SDSN, and we are also grateful to you. Angelo.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting and inspiring afternoon or morning, depends on the area. And I thank all of you for this contribution to the school. This was the last seminar of the school. I think there was not a possible a better conclusion for our school. So we are very keen to see many of you in Siena for the in-person phase of the school. We will have 30 students from 18 countries. Today we had more than 200 participants from many countries. There are many questions, and in the next few days we will try also to deliver some of the questions to the participants. The topic, the SDGs in terms of crisis, is a fascinating topic, and we will work again on it with the new initiatives, because we do believe that we need to work together, as it was said, in terms of cooperation, because cooperation is fundamental to build trust, and with trust we can implement Agenda 2030. So thanks a lot to everybody for being with us today, and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.